Hi, you're listening to the Professional Speaks podcast, where we speak to senior leaders from the professional services community, past, present and future. These leaders work in accounting and finance, audit, tax, corporate finance, consulting, legal, investments and risk. I'm Craig McKellar and I'll be posing questions to our guests to gain insights from them across a variety of topics such as balancing work and life, mental health and mindset, risk-taking, effective leadership, and much, much more. These insights will help us learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what we want to achieve in our careers. Here's what's coming up on today's episode.
Relationships are key. Basically, what do? We sell our time, and we manage to convince people to buy our time through building of relationships, insight, and understanding. And you can be as good as you can be technically, but ultimately it's not just that. It's about emotional intelligence, really trying to understand what makes someone tick and motivated. And at the very outset, you're often trying to do that, and you do the same with your colleagues and with the environments you're in. If it comes back to that. Buy-in and enthusiasm. If you feel that you're pulling in the same direction and that you've got a common theme and a culture, then that helps with the inevitable tricky times that come, because there always are. The job comes with that.
Today I am joined by Harry Linklater, who is particularly well known in the Scottish and UK markets for corporate finance and financial services. His career includes working in practice as well as for banks, and he is currently focused on M&A lead advisory as a co-owner and director of H&H, a boutique corporate advisory firm with offices in Belfast and Edinburgh. Well, Harry, thank you so much for being part of this podcast series that I'm launching.
No problem.
Good. And how are you today, anyway?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm probably in a slight state of anxiety because I'm anticipating having to do a very long run at the weekend, which I was at a massage table last night, so hopefully I'll be all right for that. But
that's right. So you're running.
Yeah, I'm running the marathon. My one and only. It will be my one and only marathon this coming weekend. So the fear of the unknown still reigning over me at the moment. So is there a reason you're doing that, or? It's my wife's parents did the marathon for their silver wedding, and it was our silver wedding just the year past. So that was when the commitment got made to do it. So yeah, trying to see that through, hopefully. But I'm slightly nervous talking about it before I've actually done it. I'd rather talk in the past tense about it.
Well, good luck. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a lot of work that goes into training for a marathon. I've not done one, but can't imagine it'd be.
It's a lot of time. Yeah, definitely a lot of time commitment. But hopefully, there, touch wood.
Good. I guess we start off this conversation as well with your career. So those that maybe like listeners that don't know your career, so you're currently lead advisory director at H&H, which is a boutique advisory business, and you're also kind of co-owner, and you're also a board trustee of the Leith Theatre in Edinburgh.
Yep.
And previously in your career you've held positions at kind of partner level, director level. So I guess, if you don't mind me saying it, you've had a successful career. To date, would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I'd like to maintain a degree of humility about all these things, but yeah, no, it's been fine, it's been interesting, and a variety of different experiences as you go along as well.
Mm-hmm. And getting into senior leadership positions for anybody, obviously it requires technical ability and some other things, but it also includes kind of having motivation, having self-motivation. If you think about, your childhood or being in your teens or university or career or whatever, is there a point, or is there some point in your life that you think that's given me motivation to go and succeed, to go and climb the career ladder, whether that's somebody that's inspired you or some other sense for the motivation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're shaped by your family as you grow up, and in my own particular circumstance, I guess, unfortunately, my dad died when I was very young, which meant that my mum had this responsibility for the three of us children. We've all ended up doing, reasonably well for ourselves in a professional capacity in life. So certainly, I think that drive and motivation to try and stick with things, be resilient and persevere with stuff, that's been fed into me from a young age. And I guess, not only do your family shape you in a positive way, you obviously observe things as well that you kind of think in retrospect, well, maybe we would have done that slightly differently, and careers are no different to that. I think we all do what we do at the time for the right reasons. Maybe in retrospect you look back on certain things and you say, well, actually I could have done that differently, but that's, we're all an evolving species, and I think a very simple hack or way of how you might well look to, what drives you forward is keep on doing stuff that interests you, that doesn't feel like a chore or a task. Yeah. If it can be something that you've got a passion or interest in, then, the old phrase, you don't feel like you've worked a day in your life if you do something that you really enjoy. Now, don't get me wrong, there's obviously stuff where you have to do the tasks and chores on a day-to-day basis, and there's quite a lot of admin involved in owning, running and managing your own kind of office and business. But on the whole, if you're motivated by stuff that you're interested in, you don't feel the commitment being as much of a toll on you, certainly. So I would say that's probably a way of putting it.
Would you see that's how? So if you've progressed in your career, so it's not maybe it's not a case of you've got to a certain point and you thought this isn't enough for me, I want to get to the next level. It's more of I enjoy this so much that I want to do that because that also looks enjoyable.
I think a reflection I would have nowadays would be working in a smaller environment where you've got latitude to pick and to a degree choose the type of work or the area of work that you want to follow is massively important and motivating now. For me, I think in past experiences I've maybe done the thing that was expected of me or been put upon me as a kind of here's the task for you to oversee, and I'm not sure that always fitted well with my mentality on wishing to just plug away at something that I maybe didn't fully buy into. So I think in life, certainly for myself, as the way it motivates me, I would be saying that something that you believe in and genuinely are aligned with makes a big difference in terms of what you're willing to put into it, the sacrifices that are inevitably going to be there when you do it. But I think that's for me personally anyway, that's a motivation and a kind of a key to how you kind of look to pass through life.
And as well as having that motivation, some people would have maybe a vision of where they want to get to. And so looking back at your career, started off as an accountant, working in professional services, and then you went into industry, into banking, and came back into professional services. How did all that come about? Did you have a vision of where you wanted to get to? Did you leave to go into banking because you thought, I want to go down that path rather than this path? And did you, I guess the second question would be, why did you come back into professional services? Was it to go a different path? Or?
Yeah, if I deconstruct some of that, I get, at the time where I made the move to banking, was post working with Deloitte and the Big Four, and I'd worked through, even in my Deloitte days, I'd worked through from a smaller, quite entrepreneurial firm, RMD, who then effectively became subsumed within Deloitte's. So saw smaller into larger firm environment there, which was interesting to take on board. Without being funny, around the banking environment I walked into, it was at a time where I shifted both the discipline that I worked in, so I worked in commercial property for a short period of time, and into banking, and probably in retrospect, one of those steps into banking, but doing what I had done before would probably have been the right thing to do, because I didn't have that network to lean upon from the previous job and previous environment, so that was a bit of an exposure. What I realised probably in a banking environment where you're talking international markets and other things like that are applying is, at that point in time, certainly that was pre the 2008 crash, a lot of what was going out in terms of banking offers to people was very commoditised. You lacked a kind of ability to control your differentiating factor. And so that was a bit of an awakening and realisation to me that actually on a big environment like that, I think most people would acknowledge a bank environment's a fairly political environment to work within as well. So there's a few different things like that you would probably take back as observations to go, right, okay, note to self about those types of things, and then going forward in career, probably I realised to myself I probably preferred the environment where you were in a tighter, smaller team and more in control of how and where you went, and that's kind of been the majority of the time where I've worked since that point. Has been in smaller environments, and certainly taking it full circle when we as a group, in looking at setting up in Scotland, when we met the guys at H&H over in Belfast, the kind of parallels with that back at the start of my career into R&D were very, very kind of clear for me to see. So it was to me, it was a reassuring kind of return on full circle back to an environment where, the majority of the people that were there had worked in the Big Four but had opted to work in a different environment. I think almost universally everybody's got a good word to say about the Big Four, so it's not a kind of a bashing exercise. It's a really good training environment, but it also has, limitations in terms of even the scale of work that you can do, the optionality around stuff like that. So for us, I think on the whole as a team, we're all pretty much of the same background, and we all came and are motivated by the same desire to kind of be able to reach parts of the market which you maybe can't reach otherwise if you're in these environments.
I mean, just on that, some people might think, if they're in the Big Four, to leave the Big Four or is a risk, and just like in your career you've been exposed to things that you're less comfortable about and it can be a bit risky, and obviously in your job, you decide on what businesses to help and maybe not to help, and so there's a risk assessment to do. If we're talking about risks, and how if you should take that risk or not, how do you calculate or how do you determine what risk is worth taking and worth not taking?
I mean, anybody that works with me will know I love a weighted scorecard and an Excel spreadsheet, but on the whole, you can do all of these things to your heart's content, but ultimately, and this is one of the main themes when we have clients, is actually to understand what's in the DNA, what is the mindset of the person that you're acting for, and that means, as an advisor, you're missing a trick often if you don't then plug into actually what's the motivation for a person, what's their gut feel ultimately. And so that I would even say that applies to people that maybe would be kind of considering, well, would I look to take the risk of going out into a smaller environment where I'm more exposed to risk? Yes, there's that, but it's about that kind of DNA type point where you'd say, well, it's either in the makeup of a person to say, well, actually, I'm not kowtowed by that, I'm not fearful of that, and certainly, that's what we'd like to create, would be an environment where, there is risk, but there's ways that you can mitigate the risk. But I think from my own perspective, the ability to kind of shape and mould what you want to do and have control of your own destiny is a strong motivation and an outweighing factor to perceived safety. But and I think I use that word advisedly. I think in all these environments, it's also got its risks.
I was going to say perceived safety is you're taking a risk of maybe losing an opportunity or just a risk of not being able to maybe control something where you are.
I think as you grow older, you probably realise that in life you tend to regret the not doing things rather than the doing things, and that's probably a central kind of plank in my thought process. I'd say that would be kind of I think one of those things that you learn from, back to the first question, that family environment. You pick on really good points from your family environment, but you maybe sometimes also think, well, actually, there was an instance where maybe you could have been a bit more bold, or take that risk rather than not. It's an evolution, I guess. All these things.
And just kind of going back to you coming back into professional services, I think you were mentioning you met people that had similar backgrounds to you as well. Was there anything else? Was there anything else about working in professional services that you really enjoy, you find is different to maybe working in industry? I think you're working banking, so you're working with clients.
The larger corporate environment.
So it's quite similar in those sense.
Yeah, I mean the banking environment is very aligned to where you are in professional services, and that you work very symbiotically with that. I think one of the things that you can definitely pick up on is the environment that gets created, and you can do all you want within the interview process to try and understand and get a sense of it. You can cross-reference people, and that's a really important thing to do before landing in an environment. But I know from experience of some of the places that I've been in since working in the bank, that the culture and environment's a really important factor, and if you get it right, you'll have those relationships and maintain those relationships. And to this day, some of the better relationships you build, where you might even be in a competing environment, you still have a very strong and warm relationship. And then there's others maybe who might take a slightly more aggressive or draconian view, where you just say, well, fine, you're entitled to do what you are, but doesn't leave you with a respect or warmth. Yeah. And so relationships are key. Basically, what do? We sell our time, and we manage to convince people to buy our time through building of relationships, insight, and understanding. And you can be as good as you can be technically, but ultimately it's not just that. It's about emotional intelligence, really trying to understand what makes someone tick and motivated. And at the very outset, you're often trying to do that, and you do the same with your colleagues and with the environments you're in. If you it comes back to that buy-in and enthusiasm. If you feel that you're pulling in the same direction and that you've got a common theme and a culture, then that helps with the inevitable tricky times that come, because there always are. The job comes with that. Yeah, well, and tricky time, you kind of touched on it a bit earlier, but I wanted to ask a bit more about the financial crisis. I think people can think that's a bad time for everybody, but sometimes, if an economy is going through some turbulence, it can create opportunities. Working in kind of corporate finance at that time, what was that like for you? Did it create opportunities that you were able to learn from? Was it a hard time that you then learned from? Thinking back, what was it like, and how did it help you in your career going forward? Yeah, I mean, interestingly, Wayne, who's the managing director here at H&H over in Belfast, they set up right on the cusp of the 2008 crash, and they cite that as one of the key kind of points in the development of the business, because things were starting to move, and ultimately where we get trigger points for selling, which is sort of what we do, is points of change, is a reason for movement. Almost like the worst thing that you can have in our market is a stagnation or just a idle period. So positivity, negativity. Naturally, my inclination probably prefer a positive time, but a negative time does create work and activity. So lessons you learn, I guess, are things around the prudence, the need to kind of keep on top of stuff, the communication. I think one of the things that really came through in 2008 and even subsequent issues around COVID were the need to communicate. You can't over-communicate, both with your staff, with clients, and even into the wider market. And as I say, maintaining good relationships with even competitors and certainly other kind of professional services providers, things like that, are really important, because you can then help each other, as it were. I mean, it sounds a bit kind of willy-nilly, but genuinely I think that's an important thing. So the main thing you learned was communicating more. I don't think you can over-communicate. I think, and communication as well, it can take various different forms. So for example, you could look at the usual kind of trite commentary that comes out from politicians, and they're communicating, but they're not really communicating, because there's not a message to it or whatever. So I think making sure that when you do so, you're doing with a degree of vulnerability. I think it can be quite disarming in our job if you're able to acknowledge a weakness. There's probably a stereotypical view that says you have to be really robust about this and try and drive through your deal, but actually the majority of the time, if you do that, you don't get to a resolution, and ultimately most of the time your client's looking for you to get resolution on something and find an answer rather than just be dogmatic about a situation. So again, observations of people that you maybe worked with in the past or currently who have got that skill set, that's you're attracted to and work more with people that probably exhibit those characteristics. But we've done the inevitable insights training where you're going to get an understanding, and actually, whilst everybody I think probably looks at that slightly with a sceptical eye when it's being suggested, the reality is it is a very useful way of understanding with colleagues and potentially with clients to work out and say, well, actually, I've got a bit of an idea of how and what makes this person tick, and what might be the answer to one person is one thing, what might be the answer to another could be wholly different. Now, that becomes really interesting when you've got a dynamic of a team of 5 who have all got the same exit or realisation in mind, and they've got different personality types. So again, that can be a bit of a challenge because you're having to try and shepherd everybody into a kind of collective view. So again, the need to communicate, the need to kind of be clear that the person that's maybe not the most vocal, who might be sitting there and really undermines a position because they're never going to be happy with it, you need to make sure you tease out from them what they are thinking, why they're thinking, so that you don't then end up building what you think is a solution on a kind of a rocky foundation.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a really good thing to learn and to stand your good side going forward, because like you said earlier, then you've got COVID, and so the need to over-communicate to the clients is important there as well. Yeah,
and it's keeping that refreshed in your mind. I'm probably a complete hypocrite in saying that, in that if you ask the team, I probably don't communicate all the time as best as I could do, but it's as long as you have that reset that tells yourself that you should be doing that, then at least if it's a conscious thought, then you'll be minded towards it rather than just assuming you don't have to. Yeah. And certainly, I think where I've worked in environments where there's a command from on high but no feedback loop, that tends to be an environment where it might work in a short-term period, but ultimately the culture falls apart because people feel demotivated and unengaged. And it just doesn't work.
So, thinking about resets and giving yourself a reset also is helpful if other people can give you a reset or a prod. And some people, when they're going through their career, have a mentor. Have you had a mentor in the past, or more than one mentor? And if so, kind of how has that come about?
Yeah, both more formally and informally. So, formally within roles that I've had, we've kind of put in place a kind of coaching and mentorship arrangement, which has been massively helpful, and maintained a degree of dialogue with that person, to this day, even though they're not engaged, and massively to their credit, that they're always open to picking up and having a conversation. And the flip side of that is you've always got a warm referral to say, well, actually this way a good person to pick up. So you can put structure into these things, but you often find that actually there's also the informal ways of doing it. So, partners that I've worked for who maintain a good relationship and who you would take as a sounding board, and it's a really nice thing when in life that person respects what you've done enough that they'll refer work into you and say, look, I'm not doing this really actively anymore, but could you maybe help them out? So that's really nice. But I think it's really important that you're not defensive and that you're not kind of saying, well, because I've reached a certain level that I can't be or wouldn't be subject to input or insight from folk. And we do 360 reviews as well here, so it's everybody in the team's observation. I know there's probably a risk with some of these things that people don't necessarily fully give the view, but that kind of insight, and again, hark back to one of the great things you can have as a family that are around you, that will also give you, the unvarnished truth from back home often does the job as well.
And so if listeners are thinking, I could benefit from having a mentor, would you, and maybe they're at a kind of manager level, or even maybe a bit earlier on in their career, would you encourage them to ask a partner that they know well, or a senior leader that they know well, to just say, would you give me some time once a month, once every 3 months, something just to kind of stand me in good stead in what I need to do? Because sometimes I talk to some people maybe a bit later on in their career, and they maybe stagnate at a level, and it hasn't been made clear to them what they need to do to get to that next level. And I feel like sometimes they could have benefited from having a mentor in the past. Would you?
Yeah, no, wholly. I think I kind of used the word informal. I think there's a degree of when it becomes formalised, I think people's behaviours start to mould into a formalised kind of, right, is this an appraisal, or this some kind of ongoing review? So I think in-house, within an existing environment where you're employed, I think it might be more difficult to do that, because it would feel like it's an HR type driven process. I think certainly as time progresses, if you've got people that you work for that you respected how they went about stuff, and that you think aligned with, I suppose you wouldn't necessarily want to necessarily pick someone who is totally aligned with how you are, because sometimes challenge from people is a good thing, but generally someone that you respect how they operate and have candour, on your side you're willing to show a bit of vulnerability to explore what needs to be addressed, then provided you've got willing participants and people that are happy to do it, then I think it can only do you good. I think a one-off's great, but if you can make that fairly regular as well. I think we've become as a society much better at talking about things generally, whether that be into the kind of performance, how you feel, all these different things. So I think we can all probably do more of that as well. And the more you practice that, it's a bit like communication. It is a form of communication. The more you're going to be in a good place. Yeah,
and that asking somebody can be quite tough for people if they're maybe an introvert rather than an extrovert, and in professional services in particular, if you're going to succeed, you kind of need to know people and need to be able to network and things. If we're thinking about networking, is that something that's come natural to you? And I guess maybe starting off by asking, would you say you're an introvert or an extrovert, and have you always been that?
Yeah, again, as time passes, you get to know yourself better and better, and what makes you tick. I'm probably fairly introverted, but once I get to know someone, then I will be probably biasing more towards the extrovert behaviour. So I would say, for me, at the very outset of my career, the idea of walking into a room where you don't know anybody would be quite hard, and probably still to this day. If you walk into a room where you don't know a single person, it's hard. You have enough miles on the clock like me, it's quite rare for you to walk into the coffee shop down the road without bumping in or knowing someone. So I take some solace from that, say for example, but I'm at a dinner tonight where I'm going to a table where I know a couple of folk, it's a dinner with a variety of different people, that will be fine, and you go into work mode and chat away with folk. But it is daunting for people to go out, and I think for me certainly, I feel I need a kind of a thread or initial angle into something before you're kind of fully comfortable with what you do. We do a lot of cold outreach to clients, and again, that's one of the things that you realise that over time it just has to be done, and you have to get on with it. But it's it's an interesting challenge. The idea that I think from feedback from others, not necessarily here, but the idea of getting more junior members of staff comfortable with the idea of picking up the phone and just contacting people. We've become a society, I think, who are very, very much used to the email and potentially hiding away from that direct communication. And there's no substitute for it. Again,
so you would agree that people who might think that doesn't come naturally to me, you would say, well, you can do it, you just need to step out.
You have to find your way, step out your comfort zone, find your way of doing it, find a way that works for you, because ultimately that's, keeping that authenticity of how you engage with people. If you're a shy person and you just put on a zany characterization of yourself, it's not going to be you, it's not going to be authentic. So I think, know yourself and how you're best to operate, and then take it from there, I think would be certainly how I've looked at it. And we have different expectations for different people, because you can tell what certain people's personality types are like and what they're suited to.
Mm-hmm. And you were also just saying, become a society that's much better to talk about things, and obviously mental health is one thing that's kind of grown in popularity in the sense of being a focus. I think back to maybe earlier on in my career where it wasn't really spoken about, ever really, and only maybe in the last 5 years it has been. And I think it is very important, particularly in professional services, which is quite a demanding job at times, no matter what you're doing, not necessarily in corporate finance. Do you feel that in your career you've always had a work and life balance, or has there been better times than other times, and have you I guess been aware of your mental health? Or mentally?
Yeah. I mean, I'm again lucky that I'm a family environment where we've talked about these things, and I'm reasonably attuned to what's going on with that for a variety of different reasons. As a firm, we've also been kind of attuned to making sure that that's there as an option for people. That this year we even set up a voluntary counselling session for everybody, and yes, you didn't have to do it, but most people did take it up, and that was almost like a screening to say, check in. Yeah. Nobody's documenting this. Are you okay? If you're not, let's explore it. If you are, then fine. But we're still here. So we'd like to think that from an employer's perspective, we're covering that for the staff, and what the people are comfortable with that. Much like the kind of answer earlier, I think there's going to be stylistic bits where it's suited to one person to be a certain way and another person to be a certain way, and you can't impose a kind of preset formula that says you must do this. But from my own perspective, from my own work-life balance and mental health, I am conscious that we work in an environment which is quite testing and demanding. It requires a lot of resilience, because you get a lot of disappointments, far more disappointments than you get successes. So you enjoy the highs and don't get too high, and you don't get too low with the lows. And when people come into the environment, often that's the conversation that we'll have with folk will be, don't get too downbeat about X or Y setback, because that's just part of the job. Yeah. It's part of what you're going through and the learning experience, because you'll draw on that in the future to work out a different strategy, or just acknowledge there's a risk that you maybe need to meet head on rather than wait to see it fully come unwound. So there's stuff like that where you reflect on it. But yeah, in terms of how you take that out of the office, for myself, I like my golf, and actually an oddity is golf's a very social sport. But probably one of the things I like to do, I was speaking to someone at the weekend who was saying that they like to go hill walking, but they like to go on their own. Yeah. And it actually resonated with me when they said that, because actually, from my perspective, I quite like going out and playing a game of golf on my own in an evening. Mm-hmm. And bizarrely, that's partly because you then start to look at technical stuff on it and say, well, I'm just concentrating on something different, and you're walking, you're getting exercise. So some would say doing a marathon and running might be getting similar territory, but I'm not sure I do it. My mind's a complete scramble when I run.
And has golf been something that you've done throughout your career, but it's always mean you've had a tough week at work and you've thought, at least I'm going to play golf for the weekend. Has it been a bit like that? Or? Yeah,
I mean, it sometimes doesn't help because you play rubbish, I think that's an instance of something. I think for everybody, they'll have their own different hobby, pastime, or activity that they want to do, and it can be as simple as, right, I've had a rubbish day, I'm going to walk home rather than get the bus and not put on not put on the music or the radio when I'm walking back, so that I can just get my thoughts in order. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I think it's as simple as that, and giving yourself space and time to think, and harks back to another familiar themes. It's communication. I think for the majority of us, a problem shared is a problem halved, and that I think is a part where when you're in a professional environment, things are going to not go right, and the ability to be able to recognise that that's not a massive flaw in yourself. I probably was a bit hard on myself earlier in my career on things where you'd say, well, I could have done that better, or, what did I do? And I think if I reflected back on it, probably I didn't communicate fully what the span of what was going on at the time, where in isolation maybe something wasn't quite as it should have been. You could have said, well, actually, here's the context as to why or what happened. So I think all of these reflections come back to you, kind of boil it down into what's an important bit to yourself. It can be things like, right, I should have acted, or I should have sought to take control of a situation rather than being passive in it. And I probably would say that would be a thing that is, again, one of the things we look to try and encourage staff when they're coming through, and when you're giving appraisals and reviews to people, to say, don't just wait for a situation to unfold. If you've got the experience of maybe something not having gone right before, use that to try and direct a situation. So I think dwelling on stuff is one of the big things that happens with people's mental health. They don't process through. I think you've got to go through that cycle of processing through a thing that causes you concern, and if you do that, then you'll take it into a learning rather than a fear.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. As we're talking about understanding ourselves and others, when you come into a leadership role, when you're managing people, which you've had experience of, if listeners are thinking about tips on being an effective leader, what would you say being an effective leader is? Would it be, you've been talking about communication, would it be other aspects? What would make a leader effective? Because some people, I don't know if you would agree with this, but some people would also go into senior positions maybe based on their performance rather than their ability to manage people as well. So, there are many leaders out there, but not everyone is effective.
Yeah, and the, authenticity of how you are and making that match how you try and carry out that role, I think, is really key, because you'll have a perception in your mind before of what might be appropriate, and maybe the reality is that doesn't fit with what your natural reaction would be. I think there's different forms of leadership, so understanding where you sit within a psychology and positioning is an important starting point before you ever even think about how does that work with others, and then it really comes down to what makes you tick. I think the examples where you can it's maybe easier to pick on the bits that don't tend to work rather than the things that do work, and often where it doesn't work is when people put on a kind of portray a stance or a position that they want to impose. And I'm a great believer sometimes in meetings where you maybe have that disparate group and you've got to get a resolution to it. You actually probably have to sometimes just say, look, on a ship you have one captain and everybody listens to the captain, and there's a reason why that had come about or evolved over time. I think personality-wise, you've got to be careful if you've got a group to think, well, in that group, are we all headed in the same direction? Are we all happy to work under the direction of the person that's there? And it shouldn't necessarily be time and service or any other kind of metric that determines who goes to that role. Often it's quietly effective people that can do it, and they wouldn't necessarily exhibit all of the characteristics people would expect in a leader. But when you see it in action, you say, well, actually, they're really good and effective at it. So it's often the person that's not pushing themselves to the forefront that's the person that maybe is best.
Is that how it's happened for you? Would you say?
Yeah. No, listen. You don't do the job for that many years without seeing the good, bad, and the ugly of all of that. So sometimes it works, sometimes not. I mean, certainly when we look at clients potentially taking them on and how they have as an ecosystem around them, we actually place a pretty strong emphasis on the management, as everybody that invests and advises does. We also look at things like the non-exec formula around them in terms of input and insights and how they work with them. Because again, if people are getting given the feedback loop but they're not taking it on board, then it's a bit of a red flag. So I tend to, probably nobody likes to self-reflect and think of their own leadership style or anything like that. And we don't. We are a flat collective. We don't really have a kind of a view that says one of us is a leader. We're all leaders and we all want to shape the behaviour. And I think in our environment anyway, that's probably where we're at. But when you're looking at client companies where an investor's going to want someone to be leading the charge on it, certainly you kind of have that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And when looking at successful people, sometimes you might just look at their success and almost like an iceberg. Kind of what you see is you think, oh, they must have always been brilliant and things. But also there's a lot of hard work, but there's also a lot of kind of failures, mistakes that maybe somebody's gone through and learned from. When you've had disappointments or setbacks in your career, how would you say that you approach failure or disappointments and setbacks? It's not always failure, but things not going right.
Yeah, as I said earlier, you don't get too high with the highs, don't get too low with the lows. I think there's if you don't try and tune into what has happened and try and dissect it, then you're not doing the right thing, obviously. But on the whole, I would say you would tend to find situations where you say, well, actually, that could have been better. You want to look at it, understand it, analyse it. On the whole, you can usually work out what you could or should have done. So I'm a great believer in that active act rather than passivity. And I think that's probably one of the things that you'll find over time with things that maybe didn't go right. There's usually a gap where you say, well, actually, I should have either run or addressed that point. So I think that would be to my mind, quite often there's that kind of, if you let things drift, and we've got a terrible tendency at the moment, I think, in this market where activity is allowed to drift because people are either hard to get hold of, there's a risk that maybe people working at home take a day to get to rather than half a day that would have been the case back in the day. So these kind of compounding effects can impact stuff, and I'm probably quite conscious that at times you've got to try and push that agenda. And again, as we're working in an environment, if you're working with others, trying to say, right, keep on top of it and be potentially annoying to people because you have to do it, but keep on top of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So you've got quite a healthy mindset, I would say, to approaching failure. Is that shaped from family, history events, or was it early on in your career that maybe you took something too seriously and thought it's not worth it?
Yeah, I think we're all various different layers of what makes us up. Certainly, a childhood where one of your parents wasn't around made you kind of fairly resilient to stuff, but I probably would reflect on things. If I could have another go back, you would probably have been a bit more flexible and, don't take yourself quite so seriously at times. So I think there's a bit, there's a bit of all of these different things that you're just packaged in a way, and you learn over time to take off some of those harder edges. But yeah, it's a kind of, I think for me personally, that intellectual curiosity of learning how to think about stuff in our family home, we probably talk about it quite a bit, and it's hopefully something that's helpful for people. What you realise is if you don't talk about it and you try and work it out yourself, there's a few cul-de-sacs that you might well go down, and being open to people making observations and having views and talking about it, if you can bring that into everyday life, you tend to do a bit better, I would say, in terms of not even necessarily the outcome being better, but your ability to learn and or reset and say, well, that's what happened, that's why it happened, fine, move on. Because I don't think you can dwell on stuff too much. The world's too fast-paced nowadays to let that shape you, and neither should it shape you. You know, it's just an instant. It's a thing in life that you move on from.
And you know, that's maybe kind of personal failure and things. You know, do you feel that in your career, has there been times where you've maybe felt that you've let people down as such in some ways? And I know it's quite a hard question because you don't intently try and let people down, but with senior roles, comes kind of more responsibility as well. And if you're managing people and they're following you to get to some destination, but then it doesn't materialise, how do you kind of deal with that situation with people who might just struggle with that?
Yeah, I mean, you've always got to be kind of personally accountable for stuff, and the more responsibility you take on, the more you've got to factor in, do you have the bandwidth for that? And I think that's a challenge in a smaller environment. So, there's a number of positives that you can take from being in control of your destiny, all these different things, but the admin pile's still there, the things that need to be done. So quite often it will feel that you get to 5 o'clock in a day and you say, right, okay, now you get on with the day job. And so there's that kind of rings true in the back of the mind to say, well, have I actually done the right thing by all of those around you, clients and or everybody else? And you've got to just have your own conscience around how you look and deal with that. And, I think an ethic towards working and the mindset of putting what's important to your client first is a really important thing. And I think some might kind of say, well, has that slightly gone out of fashion? I don't think it does. I think that's one of the key characteristics of when you put a sign above the door and try and get people in. I think that's what people are looking to see from an advisor. How important is that client? And that's where, to a degree, not taking on too much, not spreading yourself too thin is one of the key parts as well. Making sure that you're doing the right thing, and quite often what we will do with assignments that might come in, especially referrals, which are it's a nice thing to be referred in work, and someone say, well, I recommend you go and speak to so and so, and it's really quite difficult when you maybe meet that referee and actually you're not able to really engage properly to do the right thing for them. But it's that candour, that ability to just be transparent with people and say, well, actually, I'm not sure this is for us, and here's why.
Yeah.
The not for us, almost everybody will do and have to tackle. The here's why bit, I think, is where the goodwill gets built within a either yourself as your own persona in business, or your firm, or your industry, whatever, is the ability to be able to say, well, actually, I'm not sure, but here's why and what I would recommend. And I think from our perspective, one of the things we always want to be able to do here, when someone gets referred in, we'd like to think we can start with companies at an earlier point than maybe others, advisors. And in that process of saying that we can maybe help companies earlier, there's probably quite a high attrition rate of, actually, this isn't one for us, and that becomes quite difficult. But when you're doing that, if you can manage it in a way where you say, well, actually, I don't think you need anybody advising you, say, for example, or this is the steps that I would recommend you do, and you're better doing this yourself because you own and have the enthusiasm for your project. Paying an advisor to try and put that down in words where they're regurgitating your words, often that's not necessary. So at a very early stage, we'll often give free guidance and input, and deliberately so, because actually it's just not appropriate, and so that there's that probably side. I don't know if I turned around the question there.
No, that's really helpful. And actually, just as we're coming to the end as well, so obviously you've had a successful career. It's not over yet. You're a very motivated individual. In the next 12 months, do you have a goal to achieve, whether that's personally or professionally?
I think you always have to have something that you're kind of motivated towards. From a professional perspective, it's continuing to push on. It's probably a fairly tough market at the moment. So the cycle of getting new business in, winning it, processing it through to a successful conclusion, and then starting again, At the moment, it feels quite it's quite a challenge because sentiment's at play as well. Mm-hmm. So you've got quite a lot of work to do to get the thing that's right, and everybody's chasing the same right thing that would be able to be executed. So there's a bit of work in that needs to be done, and very focused on that. And as a firm, we want to continue to grow, and so there's a motivation for all of these things. And then from a personal perspective, you just kind of keep on giving yourself goals and aims. Hopefully, touch wood, within the next week, one of my athletic game aims will be met by doing the marathon, hopefully. So that's a thing ticked off, but that'll be done over my shoulder. And then I don't know, probably a wider aim just of keeping fitness up on the back of that and getting back on the golf course. But I'm old enough and bad enough to know that that's not a realistic aim.
Well, all the best for the marathon, and
thank you.
Thanks again for giving us your time to chat about your career and everything else.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Professional Speaks podcast. Remember, you can watch the episode recording on our YouTube channel, and if you can, please do subscribe and share with all of your friends. The more people who listen to this, the more guests we can have on to share, so that you can learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what you want to achieve in your career. Please also contact me if you have any feedback on this episode. I'd love to hear from you.